When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
What about us sending weapons and arms and training people in other countries to terrorize their own citizens? Right. And then they flee those places and come here. We create a lot of problems in the world, and then we close our doors when we don't want to see the problems that we created.
I love that we're proposing a you broke it, you bought it view of,
I like that.
Immigration.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I'm going to quote you on that.
I love that.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan.
And I'm Dan Beecher.
And you are listening to the Data Over Dogma podcast, where we increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion and combat the spread of misinformation about the same. How are things, Dan?
Things are good, man. We've got some cool guests on the show today, and I am eager to ask some questions, so I'm just going to dive in and introduce who we got here.
All right, let's do it.
These are the two gentlemen that make up the Lawful Assembly podcast. This is Cecil Cicirello and Craig Mousin. That's Reverend Craig Mousin, JD, if you want to get all kinds of crazy about it. These two guys are, Cecil is, like me, a ding-dong with a bunch of other podcasts out here, an atheist, a secular humanist. And Craig, you're a professor at the Grace School of Applied Diplomacy at DePaul University. You're assistant minister for immigrant justice and at the Wellington United Church of Christ. How many more appellations and affiliations do you need before you're done? That's what I want to know.
And hold on now, before Craig goes, you went to all the trouble to ask him when here's what I want you to say. Okay. It's spelled PODCASTER. That's what I do.
You are a podcaster.
That's intentionally pretty much the only thing I do. What I did was I found really smart people to talk to, and that's what I got in Craig.
And you're actually a wonderful podcaster. People should check out Cognitive Dissonance, which is an amazing show. And you're also on Citation Needed, which is a great show. So some really good content out there. But today we're going to be diving into this show, which is the Lawful Assembly, and sort of talking about one point of crossover that your show and our show kind of have, regardless of the atheist and the believer dynamic. Which I don't know how you guys think that's going to work, because honestly. What do you guys just yell at each other every episode? Is that all you do? It just seems impossible.
Listeners would want more of that. Actually, our listeners want more of that. To be honest, they want more yelling.
Yeah, everybody that I tell about our show, they think, oh, it's going to be a debate show, and it's like, no, I just defer to Dan on everything.
That's what I do too.
So,
contrary. Wait a second there.
So. The reason that we wanted to have you guys on is because, Craig, you have made a particular study of immigration, especially here in the United States. You are a lawyer. You are also a minister who specializes and focuses on issues of immigration. It seems to be a kind of a big deal these days. We just had, as we record this, we just had a couple days ago the debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And this, immigration was a really huge issue in that debate, and continues to be politically. And I feel like, and I want to hear what your take on this. With apologies to Cecil, I feel like there's a cognitive dissonance happening between the people on the far right, who are largely composed of, very, very devout Christians, and it feels to me like their take on immigration is at odds with what I have read Jesus said about immigration. So I want Dan, I want Craig, I want you two to help us understand, first of all, what is the biblical take on the immigrant? I know that there are probably multiple takes, and they're probably conflicting because that's the Bible for you. But also, like, how do you guys think a Christian in the United States of America should apply those lessons to our current legal system / how we deal with the immigration issue?
I'd start with the Good Samaritan story, right from the beginning. And if your word is Jesus, and responding to him, the lawyer said, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus pops up with this story about 3 people walking on a road from Jerusalem to Jericho, and the priest and the rabbi walk by, and the Good Samaritan stops and helps heal. And we learned that the Samaritan was probably what some folks today, I hate the word, but might call an illegal alien in those places, and didn't belong, and put himself at risk to even offer aid and comfort, because the authorities might have thought that the Samaritan was the one that caused the crime, and he was trying to get out of it. It's the question of who is my neighbor? That's the starting point. And the more you look at that story and study it, that you understand that we're all walking on that road, and we may be accosted, and who's going to be there for us? And if we start making rules about who takes care of whom, we get in trouble. And we've learned in a nation-state scenario that we need certain rules to talk about borders, but we also then realize, we learned in World War II and the Holocaust, that if the rules are too strict, we turn ships like the St. Louis away and send 700 European Jews back to Europe to face the Holocaust. And therefore, we need rules for refugees and asylum seekers, and we need to figure out how those all adjust there. So that's a starting point, if that helps. And it might help more if you need more out of that, but that's my starting point. But I'd also point out that I believe very strongly as a Christian that the sacred story contained both in the Hebrew Scriptures and the Christian Scriptures. The Walter Brueggemann says that at the core of faith for Christians and Jews is the matrix of exile. That we have a story of we are forced into exile over generations. And therefore, we are thinking of that, of we are an exile people. We are a people, both a welcoming people, but also a people in exile. And therefore, that should be the basis, the matrix of how we think about how to respond to immigrants in our midst.
The exile thing's a very interesting thing. Because we don't think of European Americans as exilees, but part of the mythos of Europeans in America is that of the quote unquote pilgrims coming and at least the story that I was told when I was a kid was these were people seeking freedom, religious place to practice their freedom, their religion freely, and they were exiled. That was their story, is that they were sure. Exiles, fleeing to this land.
Yeah, I always thought the same thing, that they had to come here so they could draw their hand turkeys.
Right?
You draw it on a piece of paper, a little turkey with the 5 fingers. I think that's what. No,
their buckles, their outfits looked much better than
they were
ours.
Pretty dope, to be honest with you.
They were really good.
I don't know if any of you have been to Plymouth or Plymouth Plantation. I was there a few summers ago. They actually, it's just south of the town of Plymouth. There is a Plymouth Plantation. You can go there as a tourist and sit down at a table with those folks and grab a drumstick and have some.
No kidding.
Yes, I'm not sure you can eat it, but they're sitting there. They're putting the food out. And you're watching them pull it out.
Oh, okay. You get to watch them eat. Okay, all right, fair. All right, okay.
That's a lot of fun.
But it's not just Plymouth, right? Catholics came to Maryland seeking religious freedom, and we found others going to Georgia, and who became the Methodists in many ways. But it's a greater issue of a general issue of freedom. Right? We have to forget, or we can't forget, that at that time there were religious wars racking Europe over all kinds of fights over things that today we look and say, really? You were fighting over that? But people were dying. And that was the cauldron where people started thinking about those very same Puritans that came to Massachusetts forced Roger Williams to flee because his brand of Puritanism was different than theirs. And Roger Williams became one of the founding theoreticians of the Baptist religion. And his understandings of religious freedom are totally different than others in a sense. But so I don't like the pain, I don't like the harm, but out of that, people start realizing, well, if I'm being persecuted because I have a certain understanding of the Puritan religion, I'm being forced to go to Rhode Island, maybe my theory should be a little more open and not to hurt others. And I hope some of us learn from that.
Well, you mentioned the Jewish tradition, and something that they have in the Jewish tradition. There are a variety of ways in which Jewish folks are to remind themselves of that background. For remember, you were a ger, you were an immigrant, you were a migrant, you were an exile, you were a slave. That's a part of their tradition to constantly remind yourself of that background, which is something that a lot of Christians, I think, don't do. We don't have a lot of folks who know, well, this is the origin of this particular denomination split off because we were trying to escape from persecution from another denomination that itself was trying to escape from persecution from another denomination. That kind of history is kind of left in the dustbin for a lot of Christians. I don't think that is the kind of identity marker in a lot of Christian identities that it is within the Jewish identity. You've done a lot of work on precisely that kind of understanding of one's sacred past. Do you have any thoughts on why Christianity might be an awful lot of Christians anyway, might be a little loath to treat that as central to their identity, whereas within Judaism it is foundational?
Dan, if I knew that answer, I'd really be successful in figuring out how to resolve it. But I do struggle with that because one of the articles I wrote, I contrast. A student of mine had given me a photo of some graffiti she saw in Florence, Italy, and it showed Jesus Christ with a crown of thorns, and he had a little placard on his front and said, "Migrant for life." And there, that points out a Christian version of that is the central part of Christianity, that Jesus was a migrant for life. And a few weeks later, as I was working on this story, I saw a photo from January 6th. And there's this very traditional photo that's in probably every Protestant Sunday school of Jesus kind of looking up, and this relatively white Jesus looking up. And but in the photo from January 6th, he had a MAGA hat on. And the Smithsonian's actually called that MAGA Jesus. And that's the group that you're suggesting is not thinking of the founding principles of Christianity being in exile, forgetting that Jesus was an illegal immigrant coming back after his parents took him to Egypt. Can you imagine Joseph trying to prove he was the biological father of this young baby when they're coming back from Egypt into Israel? I did another paper much earlier on every major protagonist in the Bible. If you used the current prism of American immigration law, every major figure from Adam and Eve to St. Paul would have violated U.S. immigration law. Everyone would have been deported and excluded. Everyone. Noah, you know how Noah broke immigration law? One, he went to another land without a visa, right? So he ends up in Turkey. But the more important one, we have anti-smuggling laws. And the smuggling laws say, you bring someone across the border, you're guilty of an immigration violation, but we'll exempt your family. Oh, wait. We'll only accept the children, the daughters-in-law made Noah a smuggler, which would have made him deportable, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
He didn't fill out the
Jesus
little
probably
strip of paper that they hand you when you're coming
well, he
in.
did. Yeah,
You're
what do you
I
have to
don't know how to
declare?
fill
I
this
don't know,
out.
two
Yeah.
of each?
right.
Yeah.
I mean, so it to me, that whole history there is that foundational, but we forget it. We get caught up into that the other side of Christianity, that we've been chosen by God as an exceptional people to be in this land and to hold on to this land as ours. And that was a debate in the Jewish and Christian Bible of what part, whose King David was certainly monarchical. And then in one of the big debates I have with former Attorney General Sessions, he really liked Nehemiah. Why did he like Nehemiah? Because Nehemiah built a wall.
Yeah.
And as he was quoted saying, that wall wasn't to keep people in, it was to keep people in. Well, I've done some research that Nehemiah had one version, but there were a lot of folks in Israel at that time that had a different version, and there's a tension. So what happens is we start grabbing different parts of the Bible that we seem to like are part of, let's build that wall and wall ourselves in.
Yeah,
We've never encountered people grabbing the same part of the Bible but deploying it differently for their own purposes.
Yeah.
We've never seen that on our show.
this is news to me.
Can I point out just go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say one of the things that I think this reminder that you were this way. This is about restricting the use of power. It's about suggesting that you need to keep that in mind in order to appropriately treat people who are marginalized, minoritized, oppressed. And we have that reminder throughout, particularly within the prophetic critique that we find in the prophetic literature, the orphan, the widow, and the immigrant. And these are intended to function as kind of caps on the abuse of power. Whereas when it comes to a lot of Christianity today that wants to focus on how we can maximize our power, and it always seems to reduce to structuring power and values and boundaries to serve our interests. I don't think an awful lot of Christians are interested in putting a governor on that power. Their primary goal seems to be to find ways to maximize it, and that's troubling for me. Folks who try to leverage Christianity, try to maximize their power, have lost the plot. And I think that's something you talk about in some of the papers that you've published, that the central gospel message, even when we go back into the Hebrew Bible and those figures who are unrelated to the Christian message, it's about the fact that we're in a land that is not our own. Even within the Christian gospel, we're here on earth, which is not our home. We're supposed to be elsewhere. And to kind of sideline the concern for the other, for the neighbor, doing exactly what the lawyer in Luke 10 is doing. Why did he ask, who's my neighbor? Because he wanted to justify himself. He wanted to rationalize his reduction of that population of people who might be his neighbor, whereas Jesus is, one, identifies it as kind of a behavioral vector rather than anything else, but two, is trying to expand the boundaries of that population. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Where were you headed?
Well, I was going to get back to your earlier point about forgetting about being in exile, but I was going to cite perhaps a very particular American story about a man named Joseph Smith who finds some documents and material in upstate New York and then decides that he's not welcome in that community and starts to head west and gets to Nauvoo, Illinois, and all of a sudden gets a little persecuted there because he's not really welcome, and then gets to Missouri and loses more people and eventually finds a home in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I've been to Salt Lake, I've been to the temple, and I've watched this wonderful film about that trip. And if I urge people, it's worth watching this beautiful presentation. And I sit there as an asylum lawyer, a refugee lawyer, watching a people being persecuted as they pursue their ways across this country, and totally the American experience, right, at the time of the States. And very important to that faith tradition and very important to where they are. But I sit there and think, how do they reconcile that with the current folks who are being persecuted coming to our border?
Yeah.
That they had that tradition, and they fortunately made it to a place.
It's especially poignant that the Mormons, when they made their way here to Salt Lake City, which is where Dan and I are based, they were fleeing the country. They were coming to Mexico. This was all part of Mexico at that time. And, 1 year later, it was suddenly not Mexico anymore. But like, to me, that reversal where you can know that part of your history, part of your lore is fleeing one country to go and seek refuge in another country. And then, as you point out, so many current Mormons are build the wall MAGA, people. And it's that was 150 years ago. That wasn't that long ago. Hey, everybody, we just wanted to talk quickly about Brickhouse Nutrition's new supplement, Lean. Lean is a weight loss supplement specifically created by doctors to help people lose weight. If you can't afford weekly shots of an expensive drug, but you do need to lose more than 10 pounds, that's what Lean was created for.
I'm looking forward to trying Lean out. I've got some on the way. I've been maintaining a reasonably okay diet for a while now, and I get out and exercise whenever I can, but I am looking forward to adding this as a supplement to see if I can get some of those extra pounds off so that I can fit back into the pants that I really think I look great in.
The ingredients in Lean have been shown to lower your blood sugar, burn fat by converting it to energy, and curb your appetite and cravings, so you're not as hungry.
So let's get you started with 15% off and free rush shipping so you can add Lean to your healthy diet and exercise plan. Visit takelean.com and enter Dogma for your discount. That's promo code DOGMA at takelean.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
When I was watching on January 6th, I was watching footage live, and I spotted what seemed to me to be Captain Moroni with his title of liberty in the crowd. And I was like,
that's
wait a damn
deep
minute.
Mormon cut right there.
So I was watching this on my computer, CNN or something, and I went back and I got a screenshot and I was like, holy crap. And this is a hero from the Book of Mormon who tears down some fabric and writes on it, and for our basically this patriot kind of quote, and waves this flag around called the title of liberty. And this person was dressed more like a Roman centurion, but carrying.
It wasn't good cosplay, but it was cosplay.
But this was, and there are an awful lot of Latter-day Saints who, as Dan said, are all in on the MAGA worldview, which just is all kinds of depressing. But that's another part of our own history, which is not very old, that we also tend to overlook because, and this is something I am wont to say frequently, everyone's negotiating with the Bible, with their history, with their identities, with their exigencies and their goals for the future. Everybody's negotiating. So it's not a question of whether or not any of these things can find representation in the text. You can find all of that in the text. You can find rationalization for kicking the Mormons out in the history. I mean, there were some odd things going on within Mormonism as well. So for me, the interesting question is, why are people prioritizing the parts of their history that they're prioritizing? Why are they centering and giving priority to certain things and then marginalizing or reinterpreting away other things? And I think the reminder is, like I said, about limiting power. And for a lot of people, that's a non-starter. We're not here to try to limit power. And even Latter-day Saints, I think, we hitched our wagon in a lot of ways to an evangelical American worldview in an effort to try to access the power and the resources that are available through evangelicalism, and in a lot of ways have adopted a worldview that is more concerned with power than it is for what most Latter-day Saints every Sunday in church are hearing is our duty as a follower of Jesus.
And I have worked with a number of Latter-day Saints who I'm very proud to call my friends, and I know there's generosity and kindness and outreach as well. And I've had this debate with them as well, and been invited even to Provo to put forth some of my immigration views, and been very kindly welcomed there, and I'm very grateful for that. But I think you're right. Let me add another element to the power, because I've really struggled, as you have, with trying to talk to family members or neighbors who disagree with me. And obviously, one of the things that Cecil and I, one of the arguments we've had, or debates we've had,
mild debates,
are the Ten Commandments, right? What's the place of the Ten Commandments? And one of the issues of religion is to help give us some order out of chaos, and we see that even in the creation story in Genesis, and then people gather and in my tradition have a covenant with a God that says, if you live this way, there'll be more order. And that God says, oh, by the way, part of that covenant is to be kind to the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and to show justice and mercy.
He should have wrote that down then instead of the Ten Commandments.
Well, let's go back to Genesis. Let's go back to Leviticus. I can point them out if you want that lesson, Cecil.
That's fine. I mean, maybe put that in stone. That seems like a great idea, to be honest. I would put that in stone.
Dan, maybe you correct me, but I think Jim Wallace has counted 62 times to welcome the stranger, or it is written in the language. We just tend to find 10's a nice number to rally around. Mm-hmm. But I want to be fair that I'm a parent, and I live in Chicago, which has a lot of wonderful, beautiful elements, and we have some violence, and so I have the worries that most parents have when my children go out on the street. And so religion helps give me that order and helps give a sense. And so then I have some rules. And then how do you keep people following the rules unless there's an enforcement mechanism? And then I think, Dan, you mentioned earlier that word stewardship. God gave us the earth to be stewards of. And sometimes we overdo the stewardship, right? Well, if I'm supposed to be a steward, I better keep out people who will take too much, right? So I do think there is that tension that we all, I have people ask me, well, Craig, do you lock your doors at night? Right? So how is that different than locking our borders? And I think that's a good question. Let's talk about how vulnerable I want to be as an individual to welcome the other. But I do want to talk to folks who have that fear, right? And then that gets back to the education on, are most of the people who are fleeing violence really coming to take from us, or they're just trying to escape the harm and that our ancestors had escaped also?
Well, Craig, I'm going to guess that you have some numbers at your fingertip that could shed some light on that question. The question of, because I think, I've looked at figures of like criminality in the immigrant population versus criminality in the the citizen population here in the U.S. And it doesn't seem to shake out the way Trump would have us believe it shakes out.
Not even close. Yes. Not even close.
So talk to us a little bit about what your vision for. Let's not do a whole Craig Mousin Project 2025 here, but like what do you think as an informed, as someone who's legally informed and sort of informed by your religious leanings, what would a good policy look like for you?
Let me ask one quick question, a little quiz here. I think Cecil may know the answer because I probably asked him before. How many people lawfully immigrate to the United States every year? Do we ever hear that in the debate?
Right. That's a great question.
How many lawfully come in and enter our society. What do we have, 300 million in the United States?
300 million,
Yeah. I have no idea.
I don't want to put you on the spot. Well, that's a fair answer. It's right. I often, when I do public speaking, I do an auction. What do I hear there? I hear 10,000. I hear 100.
I mean, we hear numbers about unlawful immigration, and they're spouting numbers in the 20 million or whatever, and it's which sounds absurd to me, and I don't think is correct. But
so that's why I asked the question, because we forget that immigrants have fueled this country from our very beginning days, right? So up till recently, almost 1 million people come in a year lawfully.
Wow.
About 600,000 family-oriented, about 125,000 through employment, another 100,000 or so refugees. And it all adds up in good years, 700,000, 1 million or something. But that's a big number that a lot of people don't know, that we have had the capacity to accept and absorb and welcome and become fruitful members of our society.
Yeah.
I think that's even a low number of what we could do. Several years ago, I was working with Syrian refugees in Jordan. And Jordan had over 1 million refugees in Jordan itself.
Oh, wow.
And someone commented to me, gosh, if America took per capita the same number of refugees.
Yeah, because Jordan's a tiny, I mean, compared to us, they're a very small country.
And obviously many were living very poorly in camps and in overburdened apartments. But the fact that that country could even welcome and try to deal with the food and care of 1 million, we could do probably 50 or 60 million and not even feel the same pain was being felt in Jordan. So starting point for me is we have the capacity to be more generous.
Right.
I'm also enough of a realist that we can't take in everyone. Right. And part of what Cecil and I have been trying to do in our Lawful Assembly podcast is talk about, could we, your very question, work with the other nations of the world to say, how do we have a system that works for everybody? Part of that is helping folks in where the climate change, we put 60% of the carbon that's causing climate change, and where's the impact being felt? In a lot of the sending nations, Guatemalan farms that are getting drought or floods in other countries or rising sea levels in Bangladesh. We have some moral and just practical obligation to help those folks. So part of the immigration issues, can we help solve some of the problems that are sending?
Well, what about us sending weapons and arms and training people in other countries to terrorize their own citizens, and then they flee those places and come here? We create a lot of problems in the world, and then we close our doors when we don't want to see the problems that we created.
I love that we're proposing a "you broke it, you bought it" view of
I like
of
that.
immigration.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I'm going to quote you on that.
I love that.
When I was,
I'm kind of getting around your. So partly, I used those numbers before. We are fast approaching the problems of Italy and Japan, that we don't have enough children being born in our nation to solve Social Security, or even I'm a baby boomer, and I'm part of that generation that's going to be expecting people to keep working, to keep the retired folks working. We need more immigrants, period, let alone refugees.
Yeah.
So I think first we could up some of those numbers of family immigrants coming in. Think of all the new jobs that have been created by the inspiration of new ideas, of both in the Silicon Valley, but in the other areas that are trying to replicate the electronic knowledge and bringing people in. So 125,000, when they try to fill that quota for employment visas in this country, that gets filled almost immediately.
Right.
There are people wanting to come. We're losing some of the best and brightest minds who are going to Canada or going to New Zealand because they're more open. So, in one sense, we can up that. Now, the big issue is the refugee issue.
Right.
And depending what numbers you look at, there can be close to 80 million to 100 million, both displaced persons, which in the legal definition is people who are still in their nation, but they're not able to live in their home. They're in a camp at the other side of the country. And refugees who are technically people outside of their nation seeking a new safe place. But if you put them all together, the UN and UNHCR, United Nations High Commission of Refugees, can get up to 100 million people. It could be 60 to 100 depending on the displaced persons.
Just anywhere in the world?
Yes,
Okay.
right, total. So we're talking about people crossing the Mediterranean. We're talking about people crossing the South China Sea, going over to Australia or New Zealand, or finding places like that. And then people coming across to our land bridge with Mexico. And as you mentioned earlier, a lot of those folks are coming to what used to be Mexico.
Right.
And now we call
Yes.
it Arizona, Utah, New
Exactly.
Mexico. We have this mentality of the only way to fix it is to build a bigger wall, to build more detention camps, and exclude and make barriers out of any kind of barrier, both a physical and a legal barrier. And Cecil and I have been discussing, if we, instead of putting a lot of money, what's it, $1 million a mile or $1 million a foot to build the border wall and disrupt wilderness areas, and we could do better processing with much more expeditious discernment if someone is a true refugee, if we had the right place to train lawyers to be available to help people explain why they're fleeing. And
Yeah, it does seem like the system is so wildly overburdened and wildly underfunded that it's designed, and I think this is true. I think we can say it is designed to be a disaster that then politicians can run on look at the disaster there, not run on fixing it, like not proposing any way to actually fix it, just saying, look at how bad that is.
Yeah. All you got to do is just keep pulling away toothpicks until it falls down.
Yeah, yeah.
And then point at how terrible it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this
so,
is one of
and
the.
that gets back to my premise, at least, is my faith calls me to become an advocate for welcoming the stranger, as Dan had mentioned in the Levitical and other parts of the Hebrew Scriptures, and even the New Testament. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't put all this money to the what do they call now, the immigration industrial complex? Project 2025 wants to expand the detention facilities from 30,000 beds to over 100,000 beds.
Yeah.
All that money going into putting facilities up with barbed wire and buildings and guards and 24 and locking human capital in buildings that they can't express their lives.
And
right?
isn't it funny that if they didn't take that approach, like, they love to tout that they're the side of fiscal responsibility, but if they just let these people in and let them work while they were waiting, they would be adding to our economy. They would be building our economy. We wouldn't be paying for their housing. We wouldn't be paying for their food and everything. It would literally be the opposite. Rather than a net suck on our economy, we would be building our economy while they're waiting to be processed, while they're waiting to be dealt, to whatever. And they want to work. Like almost everyone that comes through, they're ready to work. They want they want to be productive members of society.
Well, one
25% of our building trades are immigrants or undocumented.
Yeah.
Right? And we have a housing shortage. If they were working, the other key you didn't mention is Social Security. They'd be putting money into Social Security for all those people in millennial generation worried that there won't be a Social Security system out there.
Paying
we
in
have
and
some ways to fix it.
And never having the opportunity to draw it out. That just goes in.
It's just an input.
That's free money for us, and they don't even get to keep any of it. Now that's
if we do have a lawful process, then eventually they would, but that's still 3 or 4 decades down the road.
Right.
I think one thing that is being leveraged by the folks who want to continue to be able to waive undocumented immigrants as a boogeyman in the face of other Americans. You mentioned earlier that we have birth rates are going down, and there's an awful lot of push on the part of Christian nationalists, and particularly white nationalist-leaning folks, to get white families to have more kids because they would like that to be the means of overcoming this declining birth rate rather than bringing in non-white citizens. I think there's an awful lot of white supremacy underlying a lot of the utility of this anti-immigration rhetoric, because a lot of the immigrants are coming from the global South, and the Great Replacement theory is very widely deployed by the folks who are fighting against immigration. In my previous employment, I was a scripture translation supervisor for the LDS Church. I spent plenty of time working on languages associated with refugee communities. I worked on a language called Karen, which is spoken by refugees from Myanmar. And I've spent time on the islands of Kiribati, which are some of the lowest lying islands in the world, the places where the sea level change has already entirely deleted some of the islands from that nation. And these are folks coming from the global South who are already taking up space in the U.S., and people are not even aware that there are millions of immigrants from these places who are contributing members of society who are living among them. I don't think they pay attention and realize that they're there until they have someone come and lay concrete in their backyard or something, and they're like, I don't know what language this person is speaking. And they're not. Sometimes they grow an appreciation for some of these folks who are coming here and have skills that they don't have. But one of the things that frustrates me, particularly from the point of view of Christianity, is the fact that white supremacy and this fear of non-white populations coming into the States is so popular, particularly with Donald Trump and the rhetoric that he's used. What kind of immigrants are good immigrants versus what kind of immigrants are bad immigrants? There's a very conspicuous color line that divides that for so many folks, which is, for me, one of the most aggravating parts of all of this.
Absolutely. And Dan, my church, we had, we would call it the grace of God, but we had an old building in Chicago and a lot of deferred maintenance, and the boiler was hardly working in the wintertime. And we, by the grace of God, sold it in March of 2020 and didn't have to take care of that after that. And we've sort of been a church in exile. So every 6 months we've been renting a different space to try to figure out where we want to end up locating. But our current place on the north side of Chicago, we have our worship space. There's a Karen congregation on the floor above us in the chapel above us. There's an Hispanic congregation that's worshiping in the fellowship hall, and there's the Baptist congregation worshiping in the main. And when I go in on a Sunday morning to help prepare for worship, it's glorious that there's different music, different sounds, different praises. And I just get so filled with different groups of folks being that same building, but making a joyful noise. And it just is like, this is what flourishing could be like when we allow that to happen. And just so the fact that you mentioned the Karen community, that they're there, they're vibrant and participating in Chicago. And just wanted to share that because, and I also agree with you, the race line is just really the mention about the debate this week about the Haitians and our treatment of Haiti from a lot of people don't realize that when the Haitian Revolution happened at the time of Thomas Jefferson being president, the slave owners in Haiti fled to this country for safety and from the perceived persecution that the slaves were going to have against them. And we welcomed the slave owners into here to give them protection, and then immediately set about to try to undermine the government of Haiti. And we forget that trade-off that's happened in our history. And it's just tragic on every decade against how this country has tried to make Haiti a weaker country. And now we say, why are you coming here?
There's an interesting thing that we talked about on our show. Craig often will say that the people who are afraid that someone's going to take a piece of their pie, right? So there's sort of a limited pie, and people who are afraid of immigrants are afraid they're going to take their section. They're going to take my piece. And what we talk about on our show is not the great replacement theory, but the great inspiration theory, right? So we should be inspired by migrants. We should be inspired because they bring innovation. They bring, like Craig was saying, they bring energy, a different culture. And I told Craig once, I said, we shouldn't think of it like everybody trying to take one single piece of one pie. Instead, we should think of this more like a potluck. So everybody brings something to the table and we all share in that new cultural experience instead of all just saying, we just want to protect this one sliver of pie.
And I got news for you. They have better pie.
Dude, 100%.
Our pie is not as good as their pie.
Not even close.
Hey, my mother made a pretty mean apple
I
pie.
say a banana cream pie with vanilla wafers, pretty solid, but
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Hey there, I'm Dylan Lewis, one of the hosts of Motley Fool Money. Each weekday on Motley Fool Money, we talk through the business news you need to know and the stories moving stocks on Wall Street. On weekends, we dive into the industries shaping tomorrow and host the experts, authors, and executives that understand them. Tune in for insights, a long-term perspective on investing, and of course, stock ideas. Plenty of them. To quote a listener, it pays to listen. Check us out and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
And that brings up the issue of assimilation. A lot of folks are hammering the assimilation issue. It's like, I don't want to live in the kind of America that has no contributions from a lot of the cultures that have come in to our nation. And there's I don't know if the studies have been done recently on the Cecil. You may know better than I do, but from what I understand, within 3 generations from coming into a nation, generally, the food, the clothing, and the language all tend to be lost. 3 of the most central markers of ethnic identity tend to be lost within 3 generations of an immigrant coming into a country, just because that's what's required to survive, particularly in the U.S. And there are an awful lot of people who wish that were probably 1 generation or less these days, which I don't think is. I don't think it's fair to people who are trying to look for a better life. I don't think that's the American dream, but I also think that that is a liability to us as well. I would love to see more. My experience as an American in this country has only been enriched by my encountering other cultures around me. And unfortunately, I think geographically, linguistically, in so many different ways, we're so isolated in the U.S., we tend to think that's the best way or the way it should be. And there's so much out there for folks to learn by coming into contact.
We invite both of you to come to Chicago. My wife teaches in a local elementary school, and it's probably 40 different refugee groups that she has to teach. And she's a music teacher. She teaches anti-racism global curriculum through music, and has written a couple songs that she has translated into like 30 different languages. So when someone comes in from Myanmar, she's able to welcome them with their song, and their eyes get like this, that the teacher's singing a song in their language, or the same song in Bosnian or whatever. But it's really, and then she puts on a show at the end of the year where the kids get up and sing from their cultures. And so come on out here next March, and we'll invite you to go to that show, because it really is inspiring. She comes home at night with tears in her eyes, with stories about what one little person was scared to death, and then the kids talk back in their language.
Wow,
I love
it's
that.
amazing. You know, think of that in contrast.
Just quickly, I want to invite you guys to also come to Salt Lake City sometime, because I saw a black guy just the other day. So we have diversity too.
It hit with me, bro. It hit with me. I think of that in contrast, though. I was just going to mention, you talk about their eyes opening up and how excited they are and how that changes them. Think of that in contrast to the people who you see these videos of these people getting yelled at for speaking another language, right?
Yeah.
You see these videos of someone being accosted because they're speaking a different language than someone else, and they're saying, speak English while you're here. Even though there's no actual national language in the United States. English is not our national language. There
don't be giving them ideas. They've tried. They're trying.
I guess maybe we should mention it, Dan. That way we don't give them ideas. You're absolutely right. I won't do that again.
Well, this is something that when I worked as a scripture translation supervisor, one of the things that I tried to emphasize when it came to, one, for a bizarre reason, we sometimes found ourselves having to justify our existence because a lot of people thought everybody should be learning English. But a message that I found inspiring and very useful was that the entire, for returning to the concept of the scriptures and the Bible's message, the whole Christian gospel is a message of translation, because the New Testament only originally existed in Greek. It is translated from, or at least it's the message as it originally circulated was being circulated in Aramaic, had to be translated into Greek so that it could be proliferated more widely than the Aramaic-speaking community. The message is about expanding the borders beyond linguistic boundaries and beyond national boundaries as well, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, as the Great Commission says. And so folks who want to try to reel all that back in and say, no, we all need to be isolated to our different ethnic groups, our different national groups, our different linguistic identities, are counteracting the work that the wheel that is began in motion with the New Testament. So for folks who are committed to the Christian gospel, it just strikes me as just radically hypocritical to try to follow someone whose message was overcoming those boundaries by trying to tighten those boundaries down.
I mean, I do think, now you guys can correct me on this, I think that there was the moment on the Sermon on the Mount when he said, "Blessed are the guys who put down the razor wire." I'm not sure. It's something about that. Didn't he? Or am I wrong?
My understanding is, and you're going to hear, somebody just, I think it was in response to the debate, I heard someone say that we love people by keeping them out, or something like that. And that's an expression of love, to put buoys with razor wire wrapped around them in the river, so that anyone who does try to cross will be maimed.
Can I push back a little bit on this idea as an atheist for a second to the two religious guys? We're going to do shirts versus skins. You guys are you guys are skins, so the religious guys have to take the shirt off. But it sounds like you and Craig are kind of doing a little logical fallacy here called no true Scotsman, right? You're saying that the people who don't really believe or really follow the Bible are getting it wrong. They're choosing to get it wrong, but they're following the same book you guys are. So what would you say to someone? I mean, would you say they're less? I don't think they're less of a Christian. I don't think Jeff Sessions is less of a Christian than other people are, but I think in some ways, by saying they're getting, they are factually getting it wrong, right? Because if you look at the traditions and the way in which it should be interpreted, they're factually getting it wrong. But their interpretation of it is, isn't that just as valid as your guys' interpretation of it?
Well, I think that's why I mentioned earlier, you can find all of this in the Bible and even in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Revelation and other places where there's an awful lot of us versus them rhetoric. But what I pointed out was what the question that interests me is, why are certain features being centered and given priority and other features are being marginalized or reinterpreted away? Because everybody has no other choice but to negotiate with it. And so my concern is, what are the goals? What are the rhetorical goals of the particular negotiation that you're asserting? Is it to expand the Christian message, gospel identity, or is it to expand your power? I think when people are prioritizing power over people, yes, you can make the case that is there in the Bible, and so it's not inaccurate, it's not wrong. It's a particular configuration, though, and it's a configuration that is aimed at for the purpose of increasing power. And so I would just say, well, you're using Christianity to structure power. I think a person who is using Christianity to expand their capacity for love and to help other people it's a Christianity that I appreciate more. So it's not a wrong Christianity from an objective point of view, but it is certainly one that I think has a better case to make for continued existence.
I have a little bit of different approach to just simply the power issue. There's no doubt that's part of it, and I believe there are certain folks who certainly would ascribe to it completely, that yes, that's or at least admit to themselves that that's what they're trying to do. I want to get back to what I was saying earlier about trying to raise a family in a community and having a set of guidelines and rules and trying to figure out how to do that. And there's a whole school of Christianity that takes the understanding that because we are not perfectible human beings, that we are going to either sin or we are going through weakness or fatigue or sickness. We can't perfectly be that perfect Christian. We are striving to get there, but in doing that, we also have to recognize that there are others who aren't striving. There are others who just don't want to be religious at all, and there are others who want only power. Power is their sole mechanism, and we need to be stewards of our family. We have to protect against them. So there's a whole school of religious thought that deals with my inability to be perfect. Therefore, I've got to live in the real world and be more Lades claim more pragmatic or realistic. Christian realism is what they would put that extra word on there. And I have friends and colleagues that believe strongly in that, and I believe they would claim the perfect Christian is a Christian realist. And Dan and Craig here are a little bit too much over on that utopian side of the religion, and they're having that hope for people being better than they are, and they're willing to risk that. And they would even accuse me of, I let them do the dirty work, like build the army and build the border patrol and the police force, and they're the ones protecting society, and I'm over here able to spout my idealistic versions. And so we get in that debate of whether could they live in my world even, right? So part of that's power. Dan, I don't deny you're part of it, but I think that other side of once you start understanding what's your anthropology, what's your understanding of human nature, then you kind of read your scripture through that.
I see those religious people as using the Bible to do something immoral. That's what I see it as. They're saying they're hiding behind those scriptures in a way to say, well, I'm allowed to do certain things, and then I can point it to the Bible, and then I'm using that as a sort of a moral shorthand to say I am still moral. I am following the Bible because I pick and choose those particular passages in which to enforce.
We'll have to keep having that conversation.
We will have that conversation, Craig. We're taking it off air.
Craig, one of the things that I wanted to just sort of along these lines, it just seems like, when I'm not as up on the numbers as you are, certainly, but every time I read, I hear the these politicians spouting all of these numbers about, or Trump talking about they're all criminals and they're all violent and, Hannibal Lecter's coming across the border to get us. And I feel like most of their arguments are based on a falsified view of what's actually happening at our borders, like who these people actually are, what their impact on our society actually is. And it seems to me like one of the great tells as to who's being, because you're right, Cecil, there's absolutely a case to make that they're just being Christians and it's just a different mode of Christianity. But it seems like a tell to me that they have to use lies to forward their version of this, when lying is, one of your top 10. That's one of your not
right in there.
You're not supposed to do that. Is that a fair assessment, Craig?
I'm still struggling who they are.
Okay, I'm talking about Trump. I'm talking about the far right cohort that are trying.
Jeff Sessions. Talking about
all of those.
Stephen Miller.
Well,
was just on TV the other day talking about how they're sending Venezuelan gangs to take over apartment buildings, and
which is 100. Like my family lives in Denver. That's not happening.
Yeah. No.
I know it's not. It's 100% a lie. But Stephen Miller is. I don't know if he's an out Christian, but he definitely worked on Project 2025. Right. So he's one of those people.
I know he's had family in the Holocaust, uncles or previous generation, and that's why I'm not sure of his.
Well, certainly his view. Yeah. So that's the one that's being imported to Trump anyway.
I mean, even just the whole insane they're eating our cats and dogs thing is like, they're trying to paint a false picture of who the immigrant population is. And I think one of the things that's so telling to me.
I think one of the things that Craig is trying to get across is also that it's not a binary. And I think when we use the most conspicuous representatives of a given worldview to kind of delineate what we think that worldview encapsulates. I think that sometimes distorts as well. It is a spectrum. And while I'm trying to, my cognitive science of religion approach to this is usually focused on what kind of power asymmetries are going on, who's interested in structuring power. I think that is accounting for things that are closer to the ends of the spectrum. But certainly there are folks who are engaging this in a more thoughtful way, maybe not in a way that is as thoughtful as Craig and I would like, but certainly in a more thoughtful way. And so I think nobody's immune from reducing the other to their worst representatives. And I think sometimes when we frame it that way, we're just as guilty of trying to see a binary where there's more of a spectrum.
And that's why I ask those families. I mean, I've had some very, very powerful conversations with school teachers who feel burdened that there are too many immigrants coming to their classroom and they have limited resources already. And it's a very practical problem of, I'm asked to teach a class of 25. Oh, now it's 35 and the same resources. And where's the problem? The problem must be, oh, I hear that politician saying the border is out of control. And that makes it easy for me to think, well, there are a number of Christian arguments, right? That theoretically someone coming across without papers is taking a resource that they don't own. They're stealing a resource. And so people start getting that in their head and they say, okay, that's wrong. Therefore, I want to go back to that 25 classroom and the resources that this town is paying for. That makes it ripe for the politicians who use the rhetoric to make them think they're still being good Christians, but they just want to teach your class of 25 students. And we've got to do a better job of, like we're trying to do, to call them on those statistics and those facts. I also ask people, if you come to Chicago and drive to Sabo Lakeshore Drive and the speed limit's 40, and if you go less than 55, you're a safety hazard. It's just nonstop. Do we call those illegal drivers? How many times have people jaywalked? Do we call them illegal walkers? Right?
Or just illegals altogether.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We all adjudicate them being wrong before they've been to an immigration court and had an adjudication. Yeah. I do asylum law. When I go into court and represent someone, the first thing I have to do is admit they broke the law, that they came in and they're here without papers, but they're seeking the remedy which Congress has given them, if they prove it, of getting asylum. The Refugee Convention, at its very inception, said, because of what happened in World War II and we saw Jews turned away at borders, sent back to Germany from Switzerland, or the U.S. sending the St. Louis back, people can't do the proper paperwork if they're being persecuted. But what does that mean? I have to admit in court, yes, I'm a native of X country. I came in this time. I don't have paperwork to be here. But, Your Honor, I'm going to show you all these elements that I'm able for asylum. But the people get stopped in the first part. Oh, they admitted they're wrong.
Right.
But that's how the system works. We have to do a better job of educating. And I really want to engage with other Christians to understand that why that rhetoric works when it shouldn't.
This is such a fascinating conversation. We could probably go on for hours, but we won't. I do want to tantalize our listeners and let them know that Cecil and Craig will be joining us on our after party. If you are a patron of the show, you can hear more of this fascinating conversation. If you're not, we're going to call it. Thank you so much, Cecil and Craig, for joining us on the show. Tell us about the Lawful Assembly podcast, where people can find it, all of that sort of fun stuff.
Sure. You can go to lawfulpod.com and you can find us. We've been recording since the beginning of the year, so we have a nice backlog. We have tons of great episodes. A lot of times we're talking about law stuff, so it's law things that are happening, things that are happening in the Supreme Court, whenever anything large happens with immigration, we almost always certainly talk about it. So there's lots of things that we cover, sort of a broad spectrum of topics that have to do with, election interference trials, all the way to immigration changes and the way in which, say, Project 2025 is going to change has a way to change the face of immigration. So we cover all kinds of things like that, and you can find us at lawfulpod.com.
That's
and
awesome.
come to Chicago and enjoy some of our restaurants.
Yeah.
And, cultural.
We're coming out.
Missing
We're
the summer,
on our
all
way.
the street fairs.
We're going to stay at your place. I hope I hope
come
you're
on out.
ready.
All good.
The door is open.
And did you guys not consider Bob Loblaw's Law Pod? Was that off the table when you got started? And then also I would say you want to go toe to toe on bird law, because that's an even more inside joke. Never mind.
Dan is a flowing font of cultural references, so please just
ignore
enjoy.
me.
Yeah, exactly. Friends at home, if you would like to become a patron of the show and perhaps listen in on as we talk more with Cecil and Craig, you can go to patreon.com/Data Over Dogma. If you want to reach out to us about anything that you've heard, you can write to us, contact@dataoverdogmapod.com, and we will talk to you again next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for your hospitality.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Data Over Dogma is a member of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. It is a production of Data Over Dogma Media, LLC, copyright 2024, all rights reserved.
Have you ever wondered what the science says about certain foods, products, or treatments? Does chiropractic actually work? Should I only buy organic foods? Are GMOs actually harmful? Is adrenal fatigue real?
We've got you covered. The goal of the Unbiased Science podcast is to dispel misinformation and misconceptions across an array of science and public health topics. We love to debunk myths and help arm our listeners with information so they can make evidence-based decisions. Make sure to tune in to the Unbiased Science podcast to get all of your questions answered.